Deaf community of Reddit, what are the stereotypical alcohol-induced communication errors when signing with a drunk person? My cousin is deaf and tells me of how she forgot the sign for slap so completely unprompted, hauled off and slapped the guy she was chatting with and then kept going. So this cat is waving around all like a wizard, then the other cat just POW to the little one and also dropping things she's holding in order to sign, and signing to people she knows don't sign, then getting confused / annoyed and signing slowly and very carefully instead of grabbing her phone to write. It's like no, dummy, like the threatiswawaratr. My in-laws are hearing impaired. In-laws are from Taiwan. In-laws sign a mixture of Chinese and Taiwanese sign. In-laws moved to the US 30+ years ago, and learned ASL. Father-in-law decided to teach me his version of sign, a mixture of all 3 languages. Since the family is the only people I sign to, it's the only sign I know. Now to answer your question, it's a lot easier to sign to the wifey in certain venues. Bars, clubs, over long distances. Wifey was holding our seats, and we were signing back and forth while I tried to make my way to the bar to get a few drinks. I could tell that a few people who knew sign were looking at our conversation, and wondering what in the we were saying to each other. I am sure some figured out that it was a foreign language, but I could tell a few were captivated. Thinking I would get a few laughs, I told the wifey that I had to use the restroom. Specifically, I have to. And that's when they lost it. As it turns out, the Chinese / Taiwanese sign for is the same as the ASL sign for giving birth. Pretty much translates. Made some good friends that night, and they agreed to start using the sign for birth for number 2. So, I am not deaf, and I already posted this as a response to another comment, but I thought this would add to the overall conversation. My cousin is deaf, and he says hearing people sign better when we're drunk. When we're sober, we try too hard to make all of our signs perfect. That makes us sign slowly, which can be frustrating for them to keep up with. When we're drunk, we don't care, so we sign fast. We make more mistakes, but he almost always knows what we mean. There's a pretty large deaf community around Gallaudet University, which is also near some popular dance clubs and bars in DC. Can't tell if they have translation issues once drunk, but they have the upper hand at communicating on a loud dance floor. I am not deaf, but I took ASL in college. When I got to my second year of ASL, we had to go to deaf immersion events to sign with deaf people to learn about the deaf culture. One of these events was at a bar. I have had a few drinks and I signing away with some deaf people I made friends with in the past. I am killing it in my sign language, finger spelling like a champ and sighing just as fast as anyone there. We are having a great time telling jokes and drinking, when this amazingly hot woman comes up to our group. She was about my age, in her early 20s was my guess. She signs, "Hello, my name is Ashley, it's nice to meet you." I sign back, "Hello, my name is Madavilfish, it's nice to meet you." I see everyone's eyes get as big as dinner plates. And this look of absolute horror crosses her face. She turns around and leaves. Turns out I didn't say "Hello, my name is Madavilfish, it's nice to meet you." I said, "Hello, my name is Madavilfish, it's nice to you." The sign for meet and is the difference of a finger. I'm studying ASL interpreting. Some signs are very close to each other. For example, once I was trying to sign funeral procession and I instead signed dot. Also, vegetable and virgin are almost the same. Hungry and are almost the same. I've made the sign for on accident because it's literally making a triangle with your hands. ASL is amazing, but man, it's hard to learn sometimes, lol. My sister is HOH with degenerative hearing and will eventually be completely deaf, but when she's drunk she will switch between verbally speaking and signing. It's hilarious when she's around people other than her husband / our family and they don't sign because she'll get increasingly frustrated when people can't keep up with the signing and verbal words until she remembers most people don't sign. Then she flushes all the way up to her ears and immediately drunkenly stumbles away from the social situation. What I want to know is if sign language users eavesdrop on other sign language users' conversations. I'm hearing, but I went to RIT, TIDE, for a couple of years a long time ago. Had a friend who would stutter. He would stutter in his signing at the same points that he would stutter vocally. It was more pronounced when he was drunk. Slurring was real, too. People's hands would barely move. The sign for fork is very close to that of. One time I was out with the deaf girl I had been seeing for some post-bar dinner. My interpretation skills aren't good to begin with, and when she made the motion towards her mouth with the sign I got to thinking about making up a story about sign language for this post. Making a guess. #white right pointing back hand index OK hand sign. I was at my local bar one night and a rather large group of deaf folks came in. It was a pretty slow night other than this group, and it was absolutely fascinating to see. These two gentlemen got into an argument and it was so interesting to see them so heated at each other yet completely silent other than their aggressive signing. It didn't escalate much more than shouting via signing. But it was definitely one of the most interesting nights at the bar. Because drunk people slur their words, it is very difficult for me to read their lips. Also, this is not a drunk thing, but some people talk slowly to try to help me, but it actually makes it very difficult to read their lips. I had one girl try to whisper in my ear because the music was loud, but it is much easier to just talk normally from a normal distance. That's probably the hardest thing, when the music is loud, so I have to whisper in their ear and they talk normally back to me. If the girl knows Morse code, then I'll write on a napkin and tell them to touch me in Morse code for easier communication. This sometimes helps me sleep with hearing women that know Morse code by telling them to suck my indits and das. Sometimes the women understand this as a pickup line, but occasionally the woman will suck my in Morse code without any sexual undertones, which is very strange IMO. I also am not very good at Morse code, so the sucking will distract me from trying to understand what they are saying. One time a woman blew me in Morse code and I wasn't paying attention, so when she looked up for an answer I came in her face. But that's life for a deaf person, I guess. My mom would always get giggly and have a hard time getting through a story clearly. Kind of like when hearing people are laughing and it's hard for them to get to their point. Also just general sloppiness, lol. Signs bleed into each other and you have to repeat what you're signing more. I'm not deaf, but I'd like to point out that every country has its own sign language. I'm sure this has resulted in some hilarious misunderstandings. Verbal slips of the tongue, speech errors, are fairly common when you're drunk. Think, I hissed my mystery class instead of I missed my history class. Deaf signers can produce slips of the hand. I'm a hearing person who tends to produce a lot of slips of the tongue, even when I'm not drunk, and I've also produced many slips of the hand when communicating with my deaf friends. They get a kick out of it. Hearing person here, but conversational in ASL. One time I meant to sign "Where do you work?" Instead I signed "Where do you?" The answer to both was "At home." I wasn't drunk for this, but when I met my girlfriend I hadn't practiced signing in about 4 or 5 years, despite being fluent before that. Early on in the relationship, I was trying to call her perfect, but I accidentally used the sign for France. "You are France." A year later, we still describe each other as France when we're flirting in texts, voiced English, and sign. But how are deaf people gonna even read this thread? Usually they just babbled like it doesn't mean anything, just straight up nonsense, like "Mother Chicken Friday Taxi." Apparently he wanted a ride because he couldn't drive. Poor dude was drunk. I'm deaf. There actually isn't any. Sign language is a dynamical fluid-like language. Any slip-ups or errors are hardly noticed, if ever. That could be considered stereotypical, because facial expression and body language always correspond to hand movements, that as a result have its own unique meaning. Our communication takes place in sequences of motions, not individually by words. So, it's difficult to answer your question, unless other deaf Redditor can point out otherwise. I just can't think of any. Ninja edits words. If they're deaf, how do you expect them to see this question? Now that's a good question. Off topic, but I saw a whole group / family of people, likely family, signing at the grocery store while showing affection / emotion through body language, a lot of like shoulder grabbing while laughing and such, and it made me absolutely melt. I wanted a way to go up and express that I think they are awesome and encourage their expression, but not only was I unable to properly communicate, but I didn't want it to come off wrong. Made my entire grocery run joyous, lol. My roomie went out to the club and met a group of deaf people, then brought them back to our apartment. We played beer pong. They asked me if they could buy meth off of me, and I watched 2 guys get into an argument over a deaf girl. Here's happy smiley, happy smiley, happy smiley, happy smiley, basically a video of them arguing. Besides the guy assuming for some reason that I had meth, they were pretty chill. We mostly communicated by writing out a text on our phones and showing each other. Had a pretty good time. I'm always the DD when we go out to bars. Drunk deaf. Great question.